So yeah, good afternoon. I'm Jarod Dobson again, and a couple things before I begin. First off, I'd just like to thank the conference organizers for allowing me to present today. So I'll be presenting or giving an update on the immigration and ethno-cultural content and testing for the 2021 census. So I guess before I begin, I do have to apologize in that and specifically apologize to those folks who are any data files out there in that my presentation has absolutely no statistics in it whatsoever or data, no graphs, no maps, nothing. So the StatsCan guy is not going to be talking about statistics. So there's a bit of irony there. So what am I going to talk about? Well, I'm going to be giving, this is a bit of a presentation overview. I'll be going over essentially, what are we planning on having as content for the 2021 census? So essentially, what's on the table? Unfortunately, at this point we haven't finalized what the content is going to be for 2021. That's happening about a year and a half from now. But at least I'll be able to share, what's on the table. What are we thinking about? What are we testing? So in terms of a presentation overview, first off, I'll talk about a bit of a framework for content determination, a bit of the schedule, try and go over that quickly because no one really ever likes to talk about frameworks. And then after that, I'll get into the meat of the presentation, which is essentially looking at the content as it was in 2016, the immigration questions, and showing screenshot of what the question was in 2016, discussing the issues with those questions, and then basically giving an overview of what we're testing as content for 2021. So place of birth of parents, immigrant status, year of immigration, et cetera, for the immigration questions. And then on the ethno-cultural side of things, looking at ethnic origin, the pop group or visible minority question, and then finally religion. So in terms of content determination, as I said, frameworks, no one really likes to talk about them too much. Essentially what we try and do when we're coming up with content for a census is we're trying to balance a number of dimensions. So, number one dimension would be the census data users' needs. So, particularly looking at legislative requirements, the need for information to support policy and program delivery, that kind of thing. Also, we're looking at things like, are there other data sources? Of course, a lot of people, they want to have comparable data over time. So we consider that. We don't like to change a census hugely from time to time or from census to census. There's also responding considerations. So, of course, everyone, if we spoke with census users, they would be saying, oh, you should add a question on this or that or whatever, and we'd end up with a census questionnaire that's roughly the size of War and Peace. We don't want to have that. So, we've determined in the past by looking at things that, really a census questionnaire that's, roughly, kind of 50, 60 questions, that's about as much as people actually put up with before they stop responding. Of course, there's privacy concerns, there's sensitivity concerns of certain topics. So, of course, we take those things into account. And then finally, there's our operational considerations, the cost of collecting the information, the ability to generate high-quality information or high-quality data. So, and this is something that we're often, and I think a lot of the changes or the proposed changes that we're looking at for 2021 are actually driven a little bit by internal analysis of the data and where some of that, basically the issues with the questions themselves, potentially lead to data quality concerns that allow us or encourage us to change the questions to deal with those data quality concerns. And then finally, operational feasibility. Can we actually ask the question, is it a feasible thing to do? In terms of a schedule, well, census data user consultation, there's not really a finite timeline for that. It's something where we, I guess me being here today, like I want to get your feedback in terms of what I'm proposing and what we've come up with so far. So, but really in terms of the 2021 census, the big census data user consultation occurred last year. There was a big a consultation that was done via our website, and then we also met with key stakeholder groups, user groups, and so on. But that's really ongoing. Based on that user consultation, what we went ahead and did in the spring and summer of this past year is we went and we did qualitative testing. So we had come up with proposed new versions or new ways of asking the questions. And we did roughly 100, 200 interviews with people that we'd identified in key groups, and show them different versions of the questions. So, basically to get their reactions to the questions, were we using appropriate wording? Was there anything that was sensitive that they didn't feel would be appropriate for a census? Things like that. That type of information is essential. It's key to get that via qualitative testing, because you're not going to see it in an actual content test. And so based on the qualitative testing, we revised things somewhat in terms of our proposed questions. And what we're doing is we're going in, it's basically, I think data collection starts in April 1st of next year, and we're doing a big content test. So what I mean by a big content test is we're going out and we're doing, interviewing, I think it's roughly about 135,000 households. So a lot of households across Canada. And this is going to be split into basically 3 main panels. So there's going to be a control panel, which is essentially the 2016 questions. And then there's going to be 2 test panels that for many questions, we might be able to test 2 different versions of a particular question. And so based on that, we're going to be analyzing that frantically over the summer and into the early fall. And based on that, we analyze the results, we determine what worked, what didn't work, and then we come up with a final census proposed questionnaire, which is submitted to Cabinet. So it's a point that needs to be made is that it's not Statistics Canada that determines what the content of the census is. We propose what the content should be to Cabinet, and it's Cabinet that makes the final decision on that. So where do we go from here? Well, I'll talk about the immigration questions first. There's a couple ones that are grayed out because even though they are immigration or place of birth questions, I'm not going to talk about them because they're really not going to have very substantive changes from 2016. But we'll talk about place of birth of parents, citizenship, immigrant status, and year of immigration as the key ones. So first off, I hope people can actually see that all right. This is a screenshot of what the electronic questionnaire for the place of birth of parents question looked like from 2016. And this is, I guess, a question that, I guess sort of highlights the fact that, Canadian society is changing. Like 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have a peep of any problems with this question, whereas we saw more issues with this question in 2016. So the question is, where was each of this person's parents born? Father, born in Canada or born outside of Canada. Mother, born in Canada, born outside of Canada. So, fairly straightforward question. The issue with it is the fact that the terms father and mother are not gender neutral, and they're not inclusive of all family types, so obviously same-sex couples. And I believe that there's been a couple of court decisions as well where people actually have been able to now have more than 2 legal parents. So it's things like that where family types are changing, in some cases changing quite rapidly. So we're really wanting to update the question to reflect that. And really the reason why we ask this place of birth of parents question is mostly it's to get at or to help produce or derive a variable called generation status, which is, are you a first generation Canadian, second generation Canadian, or third generation or more? So really the issue there is we're really not all that interested in where your mother was born versus whether your father was born. It's more of whether or not you are first generation, second generation, or third or more. So our test version, our first test version that we're going with, or we want to go with in next year, is gets directly at that. So it basically has a question that says, for this person, were all of your parents or both of your parents born in Canada, Or were both of your parents born outside of Canada? And if so, what country or countries were they born in? Or do you fall into a category where one of your parents was born in Canada and one of your parents was not born in Canada? So more of a direct way of getting actually at that generation status variable. A second test panel, because we're not sure if this first test is going to work. It worked relatively well in qualitative testing, but we're going to see what happens. Is basically it's a second test panel that looks very similar to the existing 2016 question, but instead of father and mother, it has parent A and parent B. So those are kind of the two options on the table for place of birth of parents. So these next questions, I'll talk about them as sort of a package because they really sort of work together. They are the citizenship question, followed by immigrant status, followed by year of immigration. So these, again, are the 2016 questions. So we've got, the first question of what country is this person a citizen? Canada by birth, Canada by naturalization, or another country. And 2016, that question was followed by, whether or not this person has been or is now, or has this person ever been a landed immigrant, yes or no. And then for those people who indicate yes, we ask them, what year did they first become a landed immigrant? So the issues with these questions are, first off, there's a possible misunderstanding of questions by respondents. So for example, a lot of immigrants, and I think my mother would be a person in this category, who've lived in Canada for many years and they've become Canadian citizens, ages ago. A lot of those people, they don't read the question, they read the answer category. So backing up here, they're not reading that little phrase, or has this person ever been? They're just going, oh, I'm not an immigrant. I took out my citizenship. And so they say no. And so then they don't subsequently get the year of immigration question. So that's, and those are people that we end up cleaning them up when we're processing the data. So it's not like we're missing a bunch of people, but it's still, it's indicative of a data quality concern that we have. Also, immigrants reporting their year of arrival in Canada versus their year of immigration. So that's again, it's a reporting issue. And a third thing on the citizenship side of things is the possible underreporting of non-Canadian citizens. So, backing up again to the citizenship question, again, people don't read that instruction, indicate more than one citizenship if applicable. They go, oh, okay, I'm Canadian by naturalization. They don't give us anything more in many cases, and so there's an issue there. So, where are we going with this in terms of testing for 2019? Well, first thing we're going to do is for both test panels is we want to split the citizenship question into two panels. So instead of one citizenship question, we'd have two. The first one would be, basically, are you a Canadian citizen by birth, a Canadian citizen by naturalization, or not a Canadian citizen? And then the second question would ask the person if they're a citizen of any other countries, and if so, which country. So that will get around that issue of the underreporting of non-Canadian citizenships. This is going to be interesting. For the first test panel, what we want to do for the questions on immigrant status and year of immigration is actually remove them. So why we want to remove them is we want to see if we can replace them with administrative data from IRCC. So basically, we've had success in 2016 with adding admission category via linkage. We're trying to do that same thing, but on a broader scale with immigrant status and year of immigration. So just linking the IRCC landing file to the census and then pulling that information directly over from the landing file. The second panel of test panel, and in case the first panel doesn't work very well, we do have a second panel that would look similar to 2016, but it would have additional skips. So we would start off with a Canadian citizenship question, and those people who indicated that they were Canadian by birth would skip the questions on immigrant status and obviously year of immigration as well. So the benefits and challenges of replacing census questions with admin data, well, the benefits are, we're reducing response burden. We're not asking people a couple of questions, and that's always, can be a good thing. We're getting improved data quality. So if we're able to do this linkage and do it well, our data will match the IRCC data a lot more closely, and that should be indicative of improved data quality. But the big benefit is the fact that we have the potential to add new content to the 2021 census from the RCC admin data. So, a big variable that we could add, for example, or have the potential to add, would be the intended province of landing. So that's something that we don't have on the census right now, but if we pulled things via linkage with the IRCC, something like that might be the possibility, or have a possibility of being added to the census. But there's challenges here. So a main challenge is that we have no linkage data before 1952, and we have very low linkage rates, or lower linkage rates, for immigrants between 1961 and 1972. And so there's going to be potential issues of comparability for those earlier immigrants. So I guess, that would be a question that I would have for you is, the benefits versus the challenges, like really how important is it to have the, very, comparable data for those earlier periods or those earlier landed immigrants. So that's it for the immigration questions. What's going on with the ethno-cultural questions is, and we'll talk about the ethnic origin, pop group, vis-min, and religion. Well, first off, we've got ethnic origin here, and this is a question that's a bit of a mouthful. So what were the ethno-cultural origins of this person's ancestors? And then we define what an ancestor is, and we give 28 examples. And then we helpfully outline why we collect the information. This question has, more or less existed in its present form, with some tweaks and so on, since about 1996. And, increasingly, people look at it and they're like, I don't know about this. It's very wordy. There's a lot of text there, and particularly if someone's doing that type of a question over the phone, it's very, very challenging to get through the entire question with someone. Now, with the census, of course, the vast majority of people are filling it out on paper, but it's still an issue. But as much or bigger an issue is the fact that we've got those examples, those 28 examples. So the examples help people understand the question, but they also influence their responses. And we've seen this, hugely with the increase, I think it was back in the 1990s, with the growth in people indicating that Canadian was their ethnic origin. So even if you look at the 2016 data, I'm sure if you looked at it and saw, first-generation Canadians, there's probably quite a number of first-generation Canadians who were born in whatever country, wherever, and they're indicating that Canadian is their ethnic origin. So that's a challenge, and particularly in cases where we've changed the list of examples, and there's a methodology, a long-standing methodology that we have in terms of determining those examples, and it's largely based on the most frequent responses from the previous census. But if that indicates that or results in an origin being added or dropped, it can have a significant impact on people changing their responses. So the big one from 2016, and we've done a lot of analysis on this, is the fact that for the 2016 census, Jewish was dropped as an example from the questionnaire, and as a result, when we were looking at the responses, those people reporting Jewish ethnicity dropped by about 50% between 2011 and 2016. So that kind of highlights the impact that particular example had on the census results. So what we want to do with ethnic origin is essentially clean it up. So we want to remove all of the unnecessary text. So the ancestor is usually more distant text. The text explaining why the question is asked. And we have two panels here. So the first panel is going to remove all of those examples. So what it's going to do instead is have a little statement saying, ancestors may have indigenous origins that may refer to different countries, origins that may not refer to different countries. And then there's going to be, at least on the electronic questionnaire, there's going to be a little phrase that says something along the lines of, if you need to see examples, then click here or access this list. So if the person clicks on that list or accesses that list, it's going to have about 300 or 400 examples of ethnic origin. So what we're trying to do there is remove the prompt effect from the list of ethnicities. So getting away from that list of 28 and having a much broader list that hopefully will not have the same prompt effect, or it shouldn't. The second test panel is one where, because this first test panel, people responded to it fairly well and qualitative, but it wasn't perfect. So what we're going to do with the second test panel is include, instead of 28 examples, we're going to have about 10 examples. And but other than that, and they're going to be split amongst indigenous origins referring to countries, and the other origins. But other than that, it's going to be the same as the first test panel. So that's what we're doing with ethnic origin. For pop group, this was the pop group or Viz-Min question on the 2016 census. So, is this person, white, South Asian, Chinese, black, et cetera, et cetera? All those categories are essentially being pulled from the Employment Act or the regulations and guidelines of the Employment Equity Act. What we want to do with this, or the issue with the question essentially is the sensitivity of the question and specific wording of some of those categories. People don't particularly like to respond to that question. In some cases, they find it offensive. Certainly for many, many people, it's a sensitive question. So where we want to go with the pop group question is essentially we have to support the Employment Equity Act. So regardless of what is done or not done, we would do it with the thought that we are still going to be producing a visible minority variable as it existed in 2016 for 2021. So the output of the 2021 census would still continue to have a visible minority variable. But what we're trying to do is revisit that question, and essentially at this point we're still in very, very early phases of our thinking. We want to ask more of a descent-based questions with more specific categories. So, is this person of European descent, of African descent, of North African descent? And that tested pretty well in qualitative testing this summer. The issue there is what we are going to try and do with the output of that question is take the output from that question, try and merge it or work with it with ethnic origin, place of birth, maybe other variables, mother tongue, and so on, to try and recreate what we have for visible minorities. So, if we're successful in doing that now for 2021 or sometime in the future, that's where we want to go, because we don't want to have a sensitive question on the census just for the sake of having a sensitive question. If we can get the same information by having a less sensitive or more accessible question, then we'd like to do that. So as I say there, that's what we're trying to do and have it still produce the categories for the Employment Equity Act. So for religion, final ethno-cultural question. This was a question in 2011. Again, this is a question that's asked really only historically every 10 years. So straightforward question, what is this person's religion? We asked people to indicate a specific denomination or religion, and then there's 13 examples in total. And the person can either specify a specific denomination or religion or indicate that they have no religion. The main issue with this one is, and it's not nearly as significant an issue as it is for ethnic origin, but essentially it's how those examples might influence people's responses. Now, as you can imagine, it's not going to be the same type of thing. Like if someone is Mormon, they're not going to look at the examples and go, okay, well, Mormon isn't here, so I guess I better choose like Presbyterian or something like that. But there is the issue that there may be concerns, or there may be issues with how those examples are influencing people's responses. So what we want to do for religion is basically do the same thing or along the same lines of what we're doing for ethnic origin. And we're going to, for test panel number 1, we're going to remove the examples and we're going to replace it with a link to a page with about 100 to 150 different denominations or religions. The second panel will include roughly the same examples as the 2016 question, but also include those same the same link to the 100 and 150 different examples of denominations and religions. Really, for the second panel, like the main thing that I can remember is that, you know, those examples will be reordered somewhat like we always do based on the frequencies of the previous census. But what we're going to do is we're going to split Muslim into, I think, Sunni Muslim and Shia Muslim for the purposes of testing. Because, of course, those examples right now are all, like, there's various denominations of Christianity, but there's nothing in terms of, for the other major religions, there's nothing indicating that a person should give or we'd like them to give a more specific response. It's just Muslim or Jewish or Hindu. So the thinking there is that we would like to encourage people to give more specific responses for non-Christian religions. And so that's my presentation. I don't know how I did for time, but anyways.
We're good.
Okay, good.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.